The way that I share information, teach, and transmit energy is through the format of what the Hawaiians call talk story. So this is a storytelling format, and its oral tradition has been a part of many indigenous cultures around the world for as long as humans have existed because of the power of storytelling, the way that people can connect with stories that's far different than just someone giving them information or a lecture. The connections that go on inside of our own world, connecting the dots to different places in our lives where what the speaker is sharing about is touching. So there's also a transmission that happens when I share information, and especially when it's happening through the storytelling format. So the frequency and the form of what I'm saying is being transmitted through the sound waves. And so many people experience some degree of awakenings and ahas or catharsis or emotional release or things like that during these kinds of transmissions. So the call today is both going to be on my perspective on the golden age and what that may mean for us and what may be important about it. And it's also going to be transmitting an energy. It's an energy of transformation. Part of what I do in the world is take people to sacred sites, to power places, specifically Mount Shasta and Hawaii. And these two particular places are vortexes for all change and transformation. And they are specifically associated with an ancient time, Lemuria. And that's why I go to these two places. There's something very specific about the sacred sites and the vortexes in these places that accelerates, catalyzes, and amplifies all change and transformation, as well as our connection to divinity, to our higher selves, to spirit. And so these places serve a very particular purpose as we're moving into what Kedar is calling here the Golden Age or an ascension process. And I was guided specifically many years ago, both by Kahuna here in Hawaii, as well as some other teachers of mine, and directly through the whales here, to bring people to these sites, to quicken them, to awaken their vibration, to have them remember who they really are. And that's really an important part of what's happening in this process as we awaken to this golden age. And so part of what my job on the planet has become and evolved to is not just to take people to these sacred sites, but also, in a sense, to bring the sacred sites to people through broadcasts like this, through radio shows, through calls, where I can actually transmit the energy of these sites to people who may be thousands of miles away and never be able to set foot into these special places. So what I do is I lead retreats, and so my take on the Golden Age, before I go too much further into this, I just want you to know that from my perspective, I don't really know what's going to happen here on the planet. You know, there's a lot of talk about 2012 and about the process that we're in. Some say that we've already stepped into this new era. Some say it's happening as we speak. Others say it's happening specifically on December 21st, 2012. And from my perspective, I don't know, and it really, I don't need to know. What's most important is the truth in the moment of now. And yes, I do feel and can sense that there is an ascension process that is happening. And we are moving into a newer and more conscious way of living. Whether that's happening, has happened, or is going to happen, there's some simple truths that from my perspective remain. And one of those is that our connection to our higher selves, our connection to our divinity and our source, and being able to live from that specific place is important. It's important now, and it's going to be even more important in an age which will likely be an age of truth and love, living from the heart chakra, living from a space of total connection of all of the chakras and mind, body, spirit. This is the way the ancient Hawaiians lived, the way they lived in Lemuria. And this is what happens when I take people to sacred sites, is we drop into a space of timelessness and we reconnect with that time when we were living from that beautiful connected space in every moment. And so that's, from my perspective, what seems to be happening here is a call for us to connect on a deeper level with our truth. And what I've seen in myself, and what many have reported to me, is that as we come closer and closer and closer to this inevitable ascension, maybe it's 2012, maybe it's not, but as time is passing in this moment right now, it's becoming more and more challenging for us when we're not in our truth, when we're not living from source, what I call inner guidance. And when we are living in that space, it's like life becomes really simple and quite easy for the most part. I mean, of course, we still have our challenges as humans, but overall, it's sort of like this metaphor of, once when I lived in a place that wasn't the truth for me to live in. I remember I was on the mainland and I lived in a big city, and it was a city that was all about glass and steel and cement and making money and all sorts of things that weren't really my core values. And when I lived in that city, I felt like I was swimming upstream in class 5 rapids, constantly struggling just to stay even with the flow of the stream. To gain an inch was like, took all of my effort. And when I shifted that, when I tuned in and got a truth about where really was the place for me to live, and I made that shift, and I moved to that place, everything changed. And from that point forward, it felt like I was on a stream, sitting on a raft, and I had somebody massaging my feet, and I was sipping a pina colada, and the sun was beating down on me in a way that was completely relaxing. And yeah, there was rapids and challenges and things to navigate, but I was going with the stream rather than against it. And what many people are experiencing today is that on a very micro level, every day and every moment, that their decisions are having bigger and bigger consequences. That when their compass is not set and pointed towards this truth, and they're not consciously connecting with it, consciously, it's an important part, because there's a lot of people who are living in some degree of what I call spiritual bypass. When I ask people, are you living from a space of truth? Are you really living from source in a connected way from your inner guided truth? Many people, probably many of the people who are on this call, would say yes. And the truth is that, of course, we are, when we are. But what about the times when we're not? How many people on this call have been in a relationship for longer than you knew it was the truth? How many of you have found yourself in situations where, as you look back in hindsight, you get, oh wow, that wasn't the highest choice, right? So, it's easy to be guided when it's just naturally happening inside of us and we're just guided. But what about when we need to be conscious of how we're receiving that guidance and what the connection, what the next steps are to take? Now, this is an extremely important thing, not just in our day and time, but as we move into times which are seemingly more uncertain. The ascension process feels to me like we're moving into a place of oneness, and yet on the way there, it appears that duality is rearing its ugly head like a cornered animal and becoming stronger. And so it's just an illusion, because that's exactly what's happening, is as the oneness comes in, well, the duality is even more pronounced. However, in that time, when the duality is more pronounced, when the black and the white is even more palpable, good, evil, all of these things, that we see in our politics and in our religions and in the world, it's very difficult today to be able to rely on our leaders, on our teachers, on really anyone for guidance and direction other than deep inside of ourselves. And that's why, if each one of us can become more connected with our truth and living our guidance, then we can be that 100th monkey together that actually takes us into this new reality. That once enough people are living from truth and love, then a shift can happen. And so, it's interesting. I was out God, maybe it was just a few weeks ago on the island of Maui. And I was taking somebody out on a custom journey for the day where they wanted a shamanic experience for the day, and I do these quite often where I take people out and the entire day is customized for them. We go to several sacred sites for the day, and my higher self is connected with their higher self and just bringing and channeling exactly what's appropriate and needed for them for the day, which can be anything. On this particular day, it happened to be the subject of this call, for me anyway, truth and inner guidance. And this woman was quite an enlightened being. She was quite conscious in a lot of ways. And when I asked her about her inner guidance, which was coming through clearly to talk to her about, she said, yeah, I'm guided. I live from source in every moment. I'm truly guided. I don't need to work on that. And yet, throughout our day together, which as a shamanic day together, of course, everything that happened had metaphorical significance. Every little event, everything that transpired was a message and was important. That's one of the ways that our guidance speaks to us, right? There's many ways that guidance comes through from the external world and the internal world. So on this day, I asked her, well, why don't you guide us for the day then? And as she did, this very interesting thing began to happen. One, many people stopped us on the trail that day. We were in a very sacred site. It's a place where the ancient kings and queens in Hawaii would go to pray and to connect with spirit. All connection with higher self is amplified in this place. And one of the reasons that I take people to sacred sites is that these places hold specific energies. In Hawaii and in Mount Shasta specifically, there are sites that amplify connection to spirit. There's also sites that amplify our creativity or amplify our ability to birth things into the world or manifest things. There are sites for death, change, and transformation, which is about letting go of our beliefs and our thoughts and our self-sabotage and things that don't serve us anymore. And then there's things, there are sites that are for teleportation and for connecting it in a really deep level with our true peaceful nature. There's all kinds of these very specific places where the Earth's energy is concentrated in a very specific form. And so when we go and we spend time in that specific space, whatever that concentrated form of energy is, it catalyzes and accelerates that change inside of us. So literally people come on the retreats and sometimes they heal things that they've been unable to heal in other places, or they create things that they've been unable to create in other places in their lives, including not just spiritual intentions like creating connection with source or oneness, but also creating material things like money and relationships. So anyway, this woman, we were out on this in this very sacred land, a place that they used to pilgrimage to from all over Hawaii. It was only for royalty and the Kahuna, except for at one specific time of year, anybody could come there. And so they came from all over, and they came in prayer. And this place holds a very high connection to spirit, and there are also a number of interdimensional portals in this place. And so as she guided us that day, it was time for us to have lunch. And so she began taking us, and people kept coming up to us on the trail, and it was interesting because they would walk up to me and they would say, is that the way? And point to the trail that we had just come from. Well, this particular place has literally dozens and dozens of different trails that go to different places. And in ancient times, a lot of people wouldn't go to this place because they would get lost in some of the interdimensional portals there. The trails go to all kinds of different places. So I found it fascinating that this man would come up to me on the trail, or a family at another point, and they would say, is that trail going the right way? Or is that trail the way? And there was this underlying assumption in there. And the assumption was that whatever the way is that I just came from is the way that they should be going. They didn't ask me, is that the way out? Is that the way to the river? Is that the way to the mountain? Is that the way to the interdimensional portal? They didn't ask any of those things. They just said, is that the way? And what that reflects is that they weren't really tuning in with source and to the highest level of where information might come from. That there was assumptions and logic and reasoning operating in there which interfere with our ability to discern and follow our guidance. So I shared this with this woman that I was out with throughout the day, as well as other things that kept happening. So she went to take us to have lunch, and she sat us down right, I mean, there weren't very many people in this valley. She took us right to a family, and she sat us down on a rock that was between the mom and the dad and the two kids. So the kids were 10 feet to our left, mom and dad 10 feet to our right, and they're yelling back and forth over our heads in communication. And we're trying to have our day together, our spiritual time, and have lunch. So it immediately became quite apparent that this was not the best and highest choice for us to have lunch. So the next place she chose was a giant boulder about 4 feet by 6 feet that sat in the middle of the trail. And as she chose that place, I said, "Are you sure this is the place? Because this is the trail, and while there aren't that many people here, you know, there'll probably be people that will come by." And she said, "No, I get this is the trail, this is the place, this is where we eat." So we didn't even sit down yet, and two different people came by and we would have walked right over where we were sitting. At this point, she realized that maybe this wasn't the best spot and that maybe there was something not quite adding up here. So the next spot that we went to, I asked her, "Okay, well, we'll take us to the next spot then." And so she did, and we had to wait for quite a while because some people were eating in this spot where she wanted us to eat at. And again, there's not many people in this place. So we had lunch, and then she began to take us out of there, and she took us right to a dead end. And then I said, "What next?" And she wanted to climb this cliff face. And as she said she wanted to climb the cliff face, she stumbled and almost fell over. At this point, I said, "Are you getting that perhaps you're not guided here? And it could be that you are, and all of this is perfect. But, what is it that you're really getting here?" And that's when she said something really funny to me. She said, "Wow, you've been talking to me about inner guidance and really connecting to source and making decisions from that today. And this is really practical, huh? Like, I'm not going to get out of here if I can't tune into that, am I?" And that's when it really hit her, that she actually wasn't as connected to source as she thought she was. And I asked her, "If you're connected to source, then how do you know? How do you know what the right choice is? How do you know which way to go on the trail?" And she couldn't answer that question. And see, to me, if you can't answer the question, how do you know when you're guided, then you don't have the power, the empowerment to call upon that guidance at any moment, right? Again, many of us are guided and it's just unconscious. We're just in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing much of the time. However, it's not conscious. So we can't call on it when we need it and we're not guided. Like in this moment when she wanted to find the trail that would take us out, and she couldn't do that because she didn't have a conscious connection. Our guidance comes to us in many ways. We have visual guidance. So for example, sometimes I can look at two trails and I can see that one looks a little different to me. And so I know that that's the appropriate trail, the highest choice. That's a visual form. We also have visual on the inside. I might just see a picture in my mind's eye of one of the trails being the appropriate trail. Then we have auditory forms of guidance. I have a voice in my head that I call my God voice. And it's the sound of that voice is as distinct to me as the sound of my mother's voice. There's no one who could ever call me on the phone and impersonate my mother and have me mistake them for my mother. I know what she sounds like. It's very clear. The same thing goes for my voice of guidance. It's the same every time. The same tone, the same pitch, the same volume. It's a man. It's located in the same place, coming from the same direction, which is behind my head. Because I know it so well, I'm not going to confuse it with something else. And I know where to look if I have guidance, if I want guidance, right? So how many of you have that kind of consciousness with your connection to Source? That's the place that we're going to, living that conscious. You know, it can come from the outside world too. I remember once I was considering whether or not I should take a journey somewhere, and just as I thought about going in one specific direction, I heard bells dinging on the radio. In fact, recently I was considering moving from the island of Hawaii because there's been some toxicity in the environment here. And as I was considering whether to move, I was driving down the road and the radio started to play this song. And the song sounded something, the lyrics were something like, "Don't ever move from the North Shore," which is where I live. And I was like, wow, those lyrics are pretty strong. I wonder if that's my guidance. But in the moment, I was actually in a little bit of fear. You know, I had been triggered by an event that had happened, and I was a little bit afraid of my health and wellness. And so I knew in order to know whether something's guidance or not, I had to be in what I call the nothingness. You know, when I was in Kauai for the first time studying Huna, I was on a trail and this tree called me over to it. I didn't know trees could talk, but this tree called me over to it. And I walked over to the tree and I was guided to just place my third eye on the tree and give it a gentle hug. And as I did that, I disappeared. And the tree disappeared. Everything disappeared. And I was now in what I call the nothingness. And I may have been there for days or weeks or seconds. I have no idea. Certainly in third dimensional time, it was a few moments. But that was my first experience of the nothingness, that place of emptiness. That's the place that guidance comes from. Many of us mistake many other things for guidance that really aren't. I have a whole list of things that I go over on my retreats of ways that people get tripped up and confused and are identified with parts of them that they perceive as their guidance, but are really just a part of the pie, right? It's like guidance takes into account so many things, and we often grab onto one or two of them and make our decisions from that, rather than from our higher self. For example, many of us make decisions based on money. Money's an important thing, and obviously we should, take money into account when we make our decisions. But certainly I don't want money, driving my car for me, driving my bus, driving my airplane, driving my life. I want it in the back, and I want my higher self in charge. That's the captain of my ship, right? So many of us do this with many practical things. We make our decisions from our wants. I remember there was a woman on one of my retreats, and she was sitting at the top of a pool, and she was wondering whether to climb down and get in the pool or not. And the rest of the group was down there swimming. And I asked her, and she said, well, yeah, I want to go down there. And I said, okay, great. Well, maybe close your eyes for a minute and tune in with your inner guidance. And she did that. She came out of the meditation and she said, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it. I want to go down there. And she got up to start to go down there, and I said, stop. Wait just a minute. Have you considered that what you want is not necessarily what's in your highest good? For her, she hadn't thought of that. So she went into a deeper meditation, and she ended up going through a cathartic clearing where she was crying. Because often, in order for us to get to our guidance, we have to move through what's in the way of it. And she had a clear intention that day, and for the journey with us. She had always been an outsider, isolated, never been a part of a group before, 50-something years old. On that journey, she decided she wanted to be a part of a group. She wanted to join life. And so to her, getting down to the pool, climbing down this short little cliff face, was a representation of what she had come on the journey for. But our guidance doesn't always take us where we think that it should. And it doesn't always give us what we want. And so when we turn it over to our higher self, which takes into account our wants, but it takes into account everything else, our sole purpose, what we're here to do on the planet, all of our wants, not just the one that we're fixated on in the moment. It takes into account practical considerations like time and money and whether we can get off work. It takes into account whether we'll be in rapport with others in our world. It takes into account logic and reasoning and all of these things. So when she turned it over to her higher self, she got clearly that it was not the truth to go down into that pool. And so she didn't. And because of that, and because we were in a sacred site, the miracle happened. And she actually got her intention, which she probably would not have gotten had she gone down in the pool. If she had gone down into the pool and not tuned into her guidance, most likely what would have happened for her is what always happens for her, is while she had been in the group, she wouldn't have been a part of the group. She would have isolated and separated herself and not really been engaged with the group. However, since she sat up on that cliff and she did not go down and swim and play with the group, what happened next, no one could have imagined, which is that because she was, in a sense, separated, because she was up on this perch and everyone else was down in the pool, that was the illusion. And because everybody was operating from that illusion, they ended up engaging with her. They ended up making it a point to talk to her and have conversations and include her in what was happening down there. And it was the most engaged that she'd ever been with a group. It was a powerful thing to witness. She actually got what she had intended by following guidance and not following her wants. However, the path to getting there, while simple, wasn't necessarily easy. The first step in receiving guidance is we have to ask for it. The next step is we must tune in and consciously get whether guidance is there or something else. And if something else is there, then it's extremely important that what we do next is we be with whatever that else is until it shifts, and then we are in the space of the nothingness where we can actually receive guidance. That's the catharsis she went through that day. She cried for about 5 or 10 minutes before she actually had the clear knowing come through that it was not the truth to go down there. And this was a powerful shift for her, and she was different after that. I remember I was in Colorado. Actually, I remember I was back on the mainland and I had this dream. And the dream was that I had been mauled by a bear. And it was a very powerful dream. It was one of those visceral dreams in which I awakened from it in a cold sweat. And I awakened not feeling well. And it felt poignant and powerful. And then I went about my life. And a month later, I found myself taking a trip to Colorado, and I had forgotten about the dream, but I was at lunch with my cousin, who, when I told him I was going to Colorado, said, "You know, there's a lot of bears there, and I hear that they've been coming down even more and getting in people's trash cans and around their houses, so be careful." And as soon as he said that, I broke into a cold sweat, and the dream came back to me viscerally and intensely. And I had a shiver of terror run through me. And so I left for Colorado, and as I got there, I could feel this fear in me. I could feel it running me. And, you know, out of that fear, I made a decision that I was not going to go hiking by myself, even though I was going to be in Colorado for 10 days, and part of what I was going for was to be in nature and to be on my own kind of retreat and journey. So one day, while on my journey in Colorado, I drove into this very special place that I had been very much guided to, and I started up to a trailhead that I was totally guided to walk on. But this fear of the bear was running me, so I couldn't bring myself to go hiking on a trail that I was guided to go on. So I had the logical thought, well, I'll tell you what, I'll just follow somebody in. And so this family walked up, and I just followed them, because that's part of bear safety is making noise and being in a group. So I just sort of trailed, 20, 30 feet behind this family and felt safe. However, about 30 minutes into the trail, there was this amazing waterfall off to the left that I was totally guided to go to. And at this moment, I forgot about the bear because I had been feeling safe. And I walked over to the waterfall, and I began to move into what was a very powerful shamanic ceremony. Part of my intention on this particular personal retreat was to really open myself up to more love. I had noticed that I pour much more love out into the world and to everyone and everything around me than I do into myself. And so I wanted to receive more of my own love. And as I stood in front of this waterfall, it opened up and became a waterfall of love and began to fill my heart. And I just began to fill with so much love. And it was so beautiful. And then in the middle of that, I bumped up against what happens when we fill ourselves with more love than we have in the past, which is we often bump into what's in the way of us being that love all the time. And when I bumped into that, I began to cry because it was my woundedness and old ungrieved loss and pain that was stuck inside of my body that was preventing that love, which is a part of the golden age, is us being the love that we are. We are here to love, and we are love, and we suffer from the illusion of separation from that love. And in this moment, that illusion and the woundedness that it had created in me was being healed in a very cathartic way. And I cried, and then boom, this whole nother level of receiving opened up where I was able to receive even more love. And then in another few moments, suddenly I remembered the bear. And a wave of panic flew through my body as I realized that I was alone next to a waterfall which masks all sound. No one was around, and that bears feed at waterfalls and they drink water at waterfalls. And suddenly I worked myself up into quite a frenzy, and I was pretty scared. And I forgot all about the waterfall, all about the love, all about the shamanic transmission that was happening, and I just stood up and started to walk away. Well, fortunately, I got about 3 or 4 steps, and I realized, hey, wait a minute. I'm being run by fear here. I don't know if there's a bear or there's not a bear. I don't know the truth. And I don't want to be, moving from a place that's not truth, moving from a place of fear, particularly when I'm in this powerful ceremony. In fact, it's quite likely that the bear came in that moment to my consciousness because unconsciously I had hit a very big place of woundedness that was stopping me from experiencing love, and that my identity was creating a distraction so that I wouldn't have to be with that woundedness. So present to that, I did the first thing that must be done when we want guidance or truth and it's not there, and it's not just naturally flowing. And that is, I asked for it. I said, please, I choose to know the truth right now as to my safety. And what happened next is what always happens when we launch that kind of an arrow of intention, which is either guidance will be present because I'll be in a state of clarity and the nothingness and love, or something that's in the way of it will be present. And so I checked in, and what was in the way clearly was fear. And so I sat there and I just allowed myself to be fully consumed by the fear, to be taken over by it. Because I knew that emotions by their very nature are transient and they change if we allow them to fully be what they are. It's only when we resist them that they persist. And so I was with the fear, and I began to yell, and I began to scream, and to shake my body, and to move my body, and to, allow the fear to move any way it wanted to. And quite shortly, maybe 5 to 10 minutes later, which seemed like quite a long time actually, because I was in a pretty intense state of moving this fear, I was in clarity, and I knew I'm safe. And I felt safe, and I knew I was safe. Clear guidance, clear knowing. What if you could make all your decisions from a place of clear knowingness? So I walked back over to the waterfall, and I began to take love in. I opened my heart. I opened up and began to just be fully filled by this love. And I went through another similar spot where I bumped into my woundedness, and I cried some, and then opened up and got connected with more of the love that I am. And then what happened next was I thought of the bear again, and I became afraid again, and the same thing happened. Immediately, like, I started to move faster, I started to think, I started to be, disconnected somewhat from my body, and I stood up and I started to walk away, thinking, oh, I'm done here. It's time to go. Until I caught myself. And I thought, wait a minute. Maybe this is just another distraction. Another way of me avoiding myself. And so again, I asked for the truth of my safety. And again, after some clearing of fear and a little bit of pain this time, a little tears came. The tears of being disconnected from truth got to clear out. And then I was again in a space of clarity. And in that space of clarity, I again knew that I was safe. And I walked back over to the waterfall and began my connection with opening up more receiving, more connection, dissolving the illusions of separation. And then something interesting happened, which I would have never experienced had I left, which is I heard a rattling sound, and I turned. And I thought it was a rattlesnake. And I sort of like ran a little bit and turned and looked, and it rattled again. And I stepped a little closer, and then it rattled from up high, like maybe shoulder height. And then it rattled on my right side, and then it rattled on my left side, and then it rattled in front of me, and then it rattled behind me, and then it rattled over my head, and then it began to rattle all around me. And then in that moment, the faces of these trees became the faces of many different Native American elders. And I was taken through a process of quickening myself to love and oneness. And it was one of the more powerful ceremonies that I've experienced in my life that never would have happened had I been run by my fear and had I left. So, how can we tune into our guidance in every moment? In the mundane. I was supposed to take a trip to visit my brother and my 9-year-old niece in Florida, and it was planned out perfectly. Everybody was available, which is not an easy task. I had arranged for this beautiful mansion for us to stay at down in the South Florida Keys for free. I had the time, I had the money, it was the perfect storm, and she wasn't going to be available if I missed this particular window for another few months. And I hadn't seen her in a long time. And I really love to see her as often as possible. And I live really far away. And so, with every green light from the third dimensional logical world, right? Like, how many of us are making our decisions from what makes sense? Like, what's logical? What seems like the path? From our wants, from what will have us be liked by others. Because what I got faced with was my inner guidance was telling me, absolutely not, do not go. And every time I felt into going on that trip, I could feel a wall, right? Because our guidance also comes in the form of our feelings. It's like I could feel this wall, this thick wall that I couldn't penetrate. And inside my body, like that's how we feel outside, inside my body I would feel this incredible contraction. Right? But I so wanted to go. And at this point, I'd actually told them I was going. So now I have the story running about my integrity. I have the logic and reasoning that it all makes sense to go. I want to go. And I've got the fear going that they're going to be mad at me and they're not going to like me anymore if I don't go. That's a lot of the slices of the pie. 2, 3, 4 of them that I have all pointing me towards going. But guidance takes in the totality of the pie. It's a much bigger picture. It doesn't know time and space. It's omnipotent. It knows our true soul purpose. It knows what we're really guided to do. It knows all of our wants and needs. It's taking into account, timelessness, limitlessness. It's holistic. And from that place, I got a no. And so I called my brother and I said, I'm really, really apologize, but I'm getting a no from my guidance. And as you know, I intend and endeavor to live from that place as much as I can. It's a practice, of course, but I get a no. I can't come. And I told her as well. And I said, and I don't have any reasons. I don't have a why. It doesn't come from the place where reasoning comes from. If I had a reason, that would be a good suspicious thing that maybe it's not from guidance. I listen to people all the time, when I ask them or I challenge them to come from a place of guidance, and then they'll tell me, oh yeah, I get it because of this, or I get it because of that. And whenever they have a because, I almost always know it's actually not from guidance. Now, the interesting thing is that at the time that I would have flown over to visit them, which would have been a very, very long day of a lot of flights and a lot of flying, as it turns out, an old injury that I have to my hearing and my nervous system became very exacerbated just before the trip would have happened. And had I traveled in that exacerbated state of injury, it would have been extremely painful and challenging for me. But I could have never known that down here in this lower dimensional world that we have been living in. That comes from the world that we are living in the golden age. And we can transcend into that age by living from that place more of the time, right now. That's the place that I challenge each and every one of you to live from. And you can practice this in your world all the time. I remember I was on one of my retreats. I lead 1 week shamanic immersion retreats in Hawaii and Mount Shasta, as I mentioned, and I had a group that I had taken onto the volcano on the Big Island. The most active volcano in the world is on the Big Island. And, it's not just active as in physically the lava is coming, but it's one of the most active power places in the world, because volcanoes are they're like the most destructive as well as the most creative force. You can't stop lava. They've tried everything, and it will take out anything in its path. And yet it's also creating new land. And so it's this powerful kundalini force. And the rock in a volcano-laden area has a lot of obsidian in it, which the metaphysical properties of obsidian are that it brings our stuff up. In Hawaii, they call it the Kahuna stone, or the sorcerer's stone, or the American Indians, one of the tribes there call it Apache tears, because it is so powerful that in Hawaii they say only a Kahuna would be willing to actually hold that stone. And so we went to a lava tube, and lava tubes, Hawaiians say, hold timelessness. They're now time. And so when I take people into lava tubes, they typically have a connection with parts of themselves that they haven't had before. And sometimes with many things they haven't had a connection with before. I've had people have ancient Hawaiians show up and take them through rituals. I have people tuned in with parts of themselves that they've buried and been unable to be with. And they have cathartic releases. And I have people who have downloads from spirits of things they've been wondering about and answers they've been seeking. And this one day we were deep in the total blackness and the total nothingness of a lava tube. And we had just finished a ceremony in which we had been chanting and toning, and the altered space was so great that one person had been crying cathartically and dry heaving for 45 minutes, and another person had been laughing, and another person that had been in this ceremony with the ancient Hawaiians. And as we came out of it, it took quite a while for people to be able to actually stand up and walk and reintegrate into themselves, because the change and the power of the transformation had been so great in this powerful vortex. And so people were really taking their time coming out. And so I went ahead of the group, And I decided to come out of the lava tube without a flashlight, with no light whatsoever. Now this lava tube is quite varied, as many lava tubes are. You know, nature is hard to have linearly. You know, so the tube is very high at some points where you can walk easily with 10 feet above your head, and in other points, you know, it gets down to, you know, 5 feet, and you have to duck. In ancient Hawaii, the ali'i, or the royalty, the kings and the queens, would take their third born to the king to this ancient cave known as the birthing cave, and they would take the child, or the mother, deep inside the cave into this womb space where she would birth this child who was destined to become the seer, the navigator, the one who could see on the inside, the psychic one. And they would stay in this cave for 21 days in the dark to develop that inner sense before they came out and began to develop the outer sense. And that's how they did it. So there's this powerful, powerful experience of being in the dark and of being only able to rely on those inner senses. And, you know, this was a breakthrough for me because there was no way to trick myself into thinking that I was following guidance. There wasn't any way for my logic or my reasoning or anything else to take over. There was only my feeling and my inner hearing and my inner sound and my inner vision. That's what would enable me to be able to feel and sense when the ceiling had changed and I was about to walk into, you know, a hard rock. I would know before I got there. And then I would reach out and feel it. And I would know before I was about to walk into a giant boulder on the cave floor, and I would stop and I would stick my foot out and I would feel it and then walk around. And when I emerged from that cave, I emerged a different person. A different person in the sense that instead of being run by my left brain, I was now engaged with a different part of myself. And I went back into my world and I began to practice it in all kinds of situations. You know, you can practice your inner guidance in all kinds of ways. You can practice it when your phone rings by not looking at it and tuning in with who's on it. You know, there's lots of mundane ways to practice like that, but what I'd like to suggest to you, if you want to practice this and you're not in a position to be, you know, out in a sacred site, because many sacred sites and power vortexes, they amplify this connection. That's one of the reasons that inner guidance, while my retreats are shamanic and all kinds of things happen on them, a thread that runs through all of them is the same that happened for me in that cave that day. People walk out with a deep connection to their truth and their inner guidance. They know it as distinguished from anything else because we're living in that container for a week that feels like a month because we alter time and space. We're actually out in these sacred sites, connecting with spirit, following guidance in every moment, clearing what's in the way of it. And so when you do that for a month, just like if you were learning a foreign language and you went to France and spent a month there, you'd come out with some degree of ability to speak that language. And it takes that kind of immersion often to really shift us. It's quite challenging for most of us to make this kind of shift without some kind of immersion. And that's why what I suggest to you is if you're not in a position to attend one of my retreats or somebody else's or go spend a week on your own on retreat, is that you can do this. You can take a day, you know, just pick a day out. Tell all your friends, tell all your family, tell everyone you know that this is your day and that you are going to be on retreat and totally unreachable, totally unplugged this day. And you turn your cell phone off and you unplug your computer and you go get in your car or on your bike or whatever your means of transportation is that day. And your intention is one simple intention for the day: to follow your inner guided truth in every moment. And so you just get in your car and you start driving. And you follow that truth. And when the truth isn't there, and this is what was challenging for this woman to get that day that I took out into that valley, is when it's not there, the thing to do is not to keep thinking about it and trying to figure it out or even keep moving, but to actually stop, pause, sit, and be present with what is there. Now, obviously, this isn't a practice for your everyday normal life because, you know, we wouldn't get anything done. But if you can take time out of your life and practice this way, then it will become an unconscious background thing that's running in your life, whether you are conscious of it or not. But you've got to take some time to do conscious practice time. So get in your car and just follow that guidance in every moment. And when you're not guided, stop and be with what's there. Be with the stories and the voices in your head and your identity and the part of you that says you're never going to be able to do this, or this is not possible, or the part that's hearing your mom say you're not good enough. Whatever's present in there, the fear or the panic that might come in getting it wrong, or the frustration or the anger, maybe the tears and the sadness that you're disconnected from this part of yourself and that you can't access this consciously. Whatever it is, be with it. Be with it powerfully. And if you be with it, it will shift. And you will find yourself in the place of the nothingness, and you will find yourself in movement from the truth to what's next. And what I can almost guarantee will happen on this day is you will have some synchronistic, miraculous results that will affirm for you when you're following guidance and when you're not. I challenged one person to do this one day, and he ended up being guided to some very remote part of the large city that he lived in, and to go into a restaurant that he wouldn't normally go into because he's a vegetarian, and he wasn't hungry. And he walked in and walked up to the bar and sat down. And within 1 minute, a woman walked out of the bathroom, walked up and sat down next to him, and it was someone that he knew that ended up being this really powerful connection for him in the business world that wouldn't have happened because they weren't in regular communication. Because they saw each other and talked that day, that sparked this new relating that led to some really great things between where he works and where she does. And that really had him become a believer, where he wasn't necessarily before. He was actually a logical left brain kind of guy. My first day in Mount Shasta, I woke up the first time I ever went there, and my guidance said, get in the car and drive. And all I did all day long that day in Shasta, my first day, was just drive. I just drove and followed guidance. And where I went to that day was extraordinary. I was guided to the most powerful places on that mountain, and I didn't even know I was on the mountain. I didn't know where I was. I was guided to really like some of the more hidden places that are off the beaten track, that are just some, giant pile of rocks in the middle of a forest somewhere that I was somehow guided to and had the kind of experience there that everyone has. The purple transmuting flame engulfed me. I healed things that I had immediate results from. I was visited by Lemurians. It was an extraordinary day, and it came from just following that guidance in every single moment. See, my job is to take people to sacred sites, and those sacred sites amplify, catalyze, and really they accelerate all change and transformation, so that people come to my retreats. They're looking for things they've never been able to receive in their whole life, literally to heal a disease, or to really go from scarcity to abundance, or to really shift and create loving relating, or a soulmate. And they really have. I mean, the last Mount Shasta trip, 2 people came wanting soulmates. One got it within 2 weeks of the trip, the other within 1 month. They're both still with those people today. One person who'd been on the verge of bankruptcy for 15 years that I'd known her, she went back, and suddenly she's in material prosperousness and abundance and material wealth, and has been ever since. There was a woman on the trip before that had allergies so severe that she had to quit her own job and move out of her own house. She was allergic to almost everything, and they all disappeared on the second day of the course. These are the kinds of things that happen on my retreats because of the power of these sacred sites. And yet, part of what those sites are doing, and part of what my job is to convey to people that the most sacred site on earth that you could be in is the place that you're at if you are following your truth, your inner guidance. When you do that, you will always be in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. And I don't mean right as in right and wrong. I mean right as in the highest choice. And therefore, what could be more sacred of a place than for you to be there in that place? Even if it's the parking lot of a store somewhere, miracles can happen there if you're following guidance. In fact, sometimes guidance will take us not into a sacred site. Before going into any sacred site, anybody who's with me, must tune into the truth of being in that site. And sometimes it's not the truth. And going in there when it's not the truth wouldn't be wise. There's a Hawaiian, in Huna, which is Hawaiian spirituality and shamanism, there are 7 principles that Serge Kahili King postulated and gave to us. And one of them is the principle that says the world is what you think it is. And so if the world is what you think it is, that both means that when you go into a sacred site that amplifies all change and transformation, it amplifies your thoughts, then instant manifestation can occur. The world is what you think it is. And if it's not the truth for you to be in that place, instant manifestation can also occur, possibly with thoughts that you don't want to manifest. So truly, what's sacred to you? Is the truth sacred? Is your inner guided, source, is that sacred? And if it is, what are you willing to do specifically right now that's different than you've ever done before to ensure that that truth gets reprioritized into your life to a higher level of you being conscious to it and following it? Because as I started out saying, we're all following our guidance to some degree or another. But in order for you to take that to another level, for most of us who don't even know how we receive guidance, that's going to take some kind of a conscious effort. So what I would suggest is take a day. That's a great place to start. Take a day and try this practice. Try the practice that I did when I told you about the bear story. It's what I call a truth-finding inquiry, where I ask for the truth, and then I get present, and if I find the truth, I follow it. When the truth isn't there, I do whatever I need to do in order to clear and get into that space of nothingness, receive the truth, and then follow it. If you do that, even for one day a month, your life will change. Your life will change dramatically. And then implementing a few simple daily practices, like somebody knocks on the door, tuning into who's there before you answer the door, will help you to train yourself to do this unconsciously. The more you do it consciously, the more you train yourself to do it unconsciously.